Hello everyone, this is Saili Salkar, SAP co-in-charge from Sanjeevani College of Engineering, Kopargaon. So I welcome you all to day 2 of SAP ABAP training program. Agenda of this session is to learn what is SAP, then different ERPs we are going to see, then we are going to proceed with the architecture, that is R by 3 architecture of SAP. Also we will learn the different modules related to SAP. Then we will see how SAP Logon process works and finally how to install the SAP Logon. So SAP stands for System Applications and Products in Data Processing. So this SAP is a ERP software, that is Enterprise Resource Planning software. So SAP was developed by a company in Germany which was named as SAP SE. This company founded the SAP ERP in the year 1972. So initially the SAP was named as System Analysis and Program Development. Then after 1977 it was renamed as System Applications and Products, that is SAP we call it today. So SAP is both, it is a name of company as well as it is a name of a ERP product. So SAP is a ERP which comprises of a number of fully integrated modules and covers virtually every aspect of the business. So as it is a ERP, as SAP is a ERP, it is designed such that it covers all the virtual aspect of, or all the business activities and process of businesses are entirely integrated in a SAP module or SAP ERP software. So initially when SAP was developed, there were three systems developed by SAP: R1, R2 and R3. You can also call it as R by 1, R by 2 and R by 3. So here this R stands for real time because SAP is an ERP which basically works within real time applications. So this system was named named as R by 1, R by 2 and R by 3. So the latest version of SAP which is used by different business organization is R by 3 version or R by 3 architecture. So this R by 1, R by 2 and R by 3, these numbers are related to the different tiers which are present in the architecture of SAP. So such as SAP is one of the ERP. There are different types of ERPs in the market. So they are nothing but SAP which we are learning, then BAN, JD Edward, Exceed, Sibel, Oracle, PeopleSoft, Microsoft, Navision, etc. So these are the different SAPs these are the different ERPs which are available in the market. But SAP is one of the most popular ERP software nowadays. So here is a worldwide ERP market share in 2013. In 2013, the survey was made to see the ERP market share of these different ERPs which we have seen. So it was found that SAP was covering 24% of market share in 2013 worldwide. So ERP market share in India was found in 2012 and it was found that SAP covers 47% of the market share as compared to the other ERPs. So you can say in this diagram the other ERPs such as IBM, Info, Microsoft, Oracle, etc. So they have their share, such as IBM has 1%, JDA has 1%, so Microsoft has 11 and Oracle 17. But SAP has the largest share of all these ERPs in the market when the survey was carried out in 2012. So this SAP covered 47% of the ERPs in the market. So we can say that SAP has its maximum share in the market as compared to the other ERP softwares. So this SAP is a widely used software nowadays. So as I have told, SAP has a different architecture. So when SAP was initially invented, it worked on R by 1 architecture. That is, it was R by 1 architecture. Here 1 stands for only one system, means SAP or this ERP worked only on a single system, or it has only a one tier architecture. That is why it was called R by 1 architecture. Then came R by 2 architecture, and then R by 2 architecture came around 1979. So around 1979 R by 2 architecture was developed, and after R by 2 architecture there was a new release in the architecture of SAP in 1992, which was called R by 3 architecture. So this R by 3 architecture is called as client server architecture. So in R by 3 architecture, there are three different layers or three different tiers in which client and server can interact with each other, and that is why it is named as R by 3 architecture, which is the widely used SAP architecture. So here R stands for real time because SAP works on the real time applications. So this R by 3 architecture developed by an SAP is a ERP standard software which was developed in 1992. So this architecture, R by 3 architecture, is compatible with the multiple platforms, and also it can work with different operating systems such as Microsoft Windows or Unix, etc. So and this R by 3 architecture was revised in 2004, and it was renamed as SAP ERP Central Component. So R by 3 architecture was renamed as SAP ERP Central Component, which is also shortly called as ECC. So now let's see how is this R by 3 architecture actually working in a SAP ERP software. So this is a SAP architecture, which is R by 3 architecture. So R is real time. Here three layers are used to build this architecture. Three different tiers are used. So first layer or first tier is called database, second is application, and third is presentation. So this three layers, which is database, application and presentation, forms the structure of SAP architecture. So on this structure basically the SAP ERP software works. So database, application and presentation. So we will see this all layers one by one. So this architecture SAP R by 3 is also called client server architecture. So for example, if we take an example of Gmail, if we log on to the Gmail by using any of the browser. So this browser, when we type the address of Gmail into the browser, or when we give the address of the Gmail in our browser, the Gmail window is opened. So this is nothing but GUI. This we can say as GUI, that is graphical user interface, which we are able to see as a user. So here once the browser is opened for Gmail, we type a address, or we give the ID and password for the Gmail, and then something in fraction of a second some operations takes place, and immediately our mail ID is open. So this process is everyone is familiar with. So immediately after user ID and password is entered on the Gmail browser, we get an email or we get our mail. So this is a simple example where you can understand how the client server architecture works. So we when are entering the email address or email ID on the Gmail browser, we get our email. So we are nothing but client. We are the client, which and the access to the client is only limited up to the GUI. Means we are only able to see the GUI of the Gmail when we are entering the ID and password. So we are nothing but the client when we are searching for the Gmail ID or password, or when we are logging onto the Gmail, we are considered as a client. So when we enter, as soon as we enter the ID and password for the Gmail, this Gmail goes or knocks to its Google server, knocks to the Google server. So this Google server is having some sort of logic which is stored in it, or it had some applications which are stored on the Google server, and they are processed as soon as we enter our ID password for Gmail. And then we know then this Google server sends the message to the database, which is at the back end of this Gmail browser, or at the back end of this Gmail, this processing takes place. Now Google server will send a message to the database to collect or to recall the ID password which we have entered. So as soon as the database gets the information from the Google server, it retrieves the ID password and sends back to the Gmail browser, that is the GUI. And then thus the information which is related to a particular ID or password is obtained on the Gmail browsers or the system which we are accessing. So this system, the whoever is accessing this system by entering the ID password is considered as a client, and the Google server through which the data through which our request is sent to the database is considered as a server, means Google server, or it is called as application server or app server. So this is a simple example where the transaction of, or where the Gmail account can be accessed. So here the one who is accessing the Gmail by entering ID password is a client, and the Google server who is processing the request and getting back to the client and opening the mail of the client is nothing but the application server. So this structure we can relate to the SAP R/3 architecture, where the client has only access to the GUI of SAP. He sends his request to the application layer, and application retrieves the data from the database and then gives the require access to the data to the client. So this is called as client server architecture, where the client gets the required data from the server. So same architecture is used by SAP, which is called R/3 architecture. So three different layers of SAP architecture are database layer, application layer, and presentation layer. So we will start with the database layer, which is the bottom layer of the SAP architecture. So database, as the name indicates, it is the place where the data is stored, the permanent data is stored, or a huge number of data is stored in a layer called as a database layer. So in SAP, the data which is stored in the database, this data is always available in the forms of tables, because SAP has a very huge number of tables, that is from hundreds to thousands of tables are available in SAP which are stored in its database. So database does the function of storing the data in it. Then second layer is the application layer, or middle layer is the application layer, which is also called as application server. So this application layer or SAP application server is the layer where we can write the logic or the code which is required for retrieving the data. That is, whatever program we are going to write in a SAP ABAP, that all programs are written in, or all programs are going into the application layer, and according to the statements of which we are using in the SAP ABAP program, this application layer, according to the statements, will retrieve the data from the database layer. Once the application layer, or once we write the code or the program in application layer, the application server, according to the code, processes and it sends the logic to the database to retrieve the data, or the logic is then taking out the data from the database. And once the required data is retrieved, the database layer transmits that data to the presentation layer and displays it on the user desktop. So what is presentation layer? Presentation layer is nothing but a GUI of SAP, where we can get the required output, or where the users can see the required output which he wants. Okay, so here you can see in this diagram, the presentation layer has PCs, laptops, etc., browser, client, web server, internet transaction servers. Okay, so here in SAP architecture, the presentation layer contains the PCs, laptops, or browser clients, whichever wants to access the data. So presentation layer is nothing but a SAP GUI, that is graphical user interface. So, three-tier architecture of SAP consists of three layers: presentation layer or presentation server, application layer, and database server or database layer. So, all these servers are linked by the communication networks, and also they perform the task without sacrificing data integration. That is, without losing any data, this all three layers performs the integrated operation and also processes within the system as a whole. So here you can see the function of each layer is displayed. So database layer, you have to keep in mind, database layer is a layer or is a where the data is stored. Database layer is the one where the data is stored, and in SAP the data is stored in the form of tables mostly. So that tables are stored in the database layer. So this is a layer, that is database layer, where the data is stored in the form of tables. So it stores and provides the data, stores as well as provides as required. Then application layer, what it does, application layer processes data using application logic, means whatever code or the program we want to write, that is written in the application layer. So it communicates with both the layers. So application is a middle layer, that is why it communicates with upper layer, that is presentation, as well as the lower layer with the which is the database, and it read and write from the database. So this application layer can read or it can write the information from the database. So here you can see application layer processes the data and gives to the database, and when the database gives back the data, so this application layer requests the data from the database and sends to the presentation layer. So last is the presentation layer. So presentation layers provide what? Provides a graphical screen to the user. User enters the data on the screen, means we can enter the required data on the screen by using presentation layer, which is our GUI of SAP, and shows the process data to the user. And after processing of the data is again displayed back on the presentation layer, that is the GUI of SAP. So this is how the three-tier architecture of SAP functions with its three layers, that is database layer, application layer, and the presentation layer. So we can say that SAP is a complete integration of entire business. So SAP, that is System Applications and Products, is a platform or it is a ERP software where the entire business processes such as finance, accounting, and then procurement, all these business processes are completely integrated on a single platform, which is the SAP platform, which is called as a SAP. So in this SAP, there are different modules. There are different modules which functions with those required company or those required organizations requirements. So the SAP functions according to its modules. This modules relates to its to the requirement of the companies. They are designed according to the requirement of the companies. So in SAP there are two kinds of modules, functional and technical. So in SAP we have functional modules as well as technical modules. So there are different kinds of functional modules. So first is human resource management, also known as HR, human resource. So basically what is the difference between functional and technical module? Functional module means which are related to different functions, undergoing functions in an organization, such as production planning, material, finance, accounting, etc. So all these functions relates to the functional SAP ERP modules, and the technical one means such as writing codes or generating the logic for the codes, that is ABAP language or HANA we can say, or NetWeaver. So all these are the technical modules, means in those we have to write the different technical codes or programs. So accordingly they are divided into functional and technical. So functional module has human resource management, production planning, material management, financial supply chain management, sales and distribution, project system, financial accounting and controlling, that is FICO, plant maintenance, PM, quality management, QM. So these are the different functional SAP ERP modules. And what are technical ones then? So technical module include SAP Basis, SAP Security, SAP ABAP, then SAP HANA, SAP NetWeaver, SAP Information System Management IS, then CRM, that is Customer Relationship Management module, then Exchange Infrastructure, SAP XI, and Solution Manager. So these are the different SAP modules which are available according to the different functions of the organization or of the business processes. So this is a architecture, this is a diagram which is showing the different modules which are present in the R/3 architecture of SAP. Now, so this was a little background related or the basic things which are related to SAP, that is how the SAP invented, then how its R/3 architecture is working and all. Now, if we have to process or if we have to actually work on SAP by using the ABAP, so we have to know or we need to know about the SAP Logon or on the codes which we are going to write in SAP ABAP that are written in a SAP Logon. So before moving on to SAP Logon, we need to know how actually is SAP Logon process working. So here is a diagram which shows the SAP Logon process working. So SAP Logon, basically SAP Logon is a platform where we are going to generate or write the code for SAP ABAP. So it is a GUI or it is a front-end GUI where we have to write the SAP codes. So that platform is called SAP Logon. So firstly we will see how the SAP Logon process works. So this is a diagram which shows the different steps or different functions how the SAP Logon is processed or working. So we will start with SAP GUI. So SAP GUI, that is graphical user interface. So we know GUI is nothing but a presentation layer of the three-tier architecture of SAP. So SAP GUI is the platform or it is a graphical user interface where we as a user will give or write the command accordingly which for the function which we are expecting. Means now if I need to log in to the Gmail, so I have already explained, if I need to log in to Gmail, I will go on the browser, enter my ID password. Similarly, if we need to log on or if we need to write the code in the SAP Logon, we have to first enter the ID password. So that ID password is one of the process which is considered by SAP. So this entering of ID password is done on the SAP GUI, that is presentation layer. So step 1. So here in this diagram you can see the different steps are explained. Step 1 is here, 2, step 3, then step 4 is here, step 5, step 6 and step 7. So these are the different steps through which the SAP Logon works or through which the SAP Logon process works. So we will see each process one by one. So once the user clicks on the SAP system or on the SAP Logon, once the user clicks or he enters the user ID and password, then this user request is forwarded to the dispatcher. So first step is what? As soon as we enter the user ID password on the logon, so this process or this user ID and password data is sent to the ABAP dispatcher or the SAP dispatcher. So this ABAP dispatcher is the first process which is going to take place as soon as a user enters his user ID and password. So here So this ABAP dispatcher is nothing but dispatcher is the one who distributes the request to the work processes. Means what is the function of dispatcher? ABAP dispatcher, because we are going to write the code in ABAP. So ABAP dispatcher means this dispatcher will distribute the request to the work processes. The function of dispatcher is to dispatch or distributes the user ID and password request to the next layer or to the next processor. So once the user ID and password is entered, it goes to the ABAP dispatcher. So now ABAP dispatcher's function is to distribute the work request to the next process. So this ABAP dispatcher, it it holds the request in the queue. There is a request queue is present in a SAP Logon, and this ABAP dispatcher sends the request to the request queues. So why this request queue is present here? Because this dispatcher follows, or ABAP dispatcher follows, the principle of first in first out rule, that is FIFO. Means whatever request, or if there are multiple requests coming to the ABAP dispatcher. Multiple request means what? There is not only the one thing, that is as soon as the user enters onto the SAP Logon, he enters the user ID and password, as well as he can click anywhere on the screen of SAP Logon. So this clicking onto the different dialogues or onto the different functions is also considered as the requests by the dispatcher. So if there are multiple requests coming one after another, this ABAP dispatcher holds all the requests in the request queue. In the request queue, all the requests are held and they are released one by one on the principle of first in first out. So as soon as the request is processed, it is given to the particular work processes. It is given to what? Particular work processes. So what is work process? So this work process, there are different types of work processes. Means if you are entering a user ID and password on a SAP Logon, so this is considered as one kind of work. Nextly, if you are writing some code, so this is considered as one kind of work, which is called as background work. Okay, so entering the code into the SAP Logon is considered as a background work. Entering user ID password is considered as a dialog work. Then if any update is coming from the SAP Logon on the user screen, or if any instruction is coming from SAP Logon to the GUI of SAP Logon, then this is considered as a update work. So there are different kinds of work processes available in Logon, that is dialog work, background work, update work, etc. So this ABAP dispatcher first identifies the type of work process. So this work process is then carried out. This work process is then carried out as per the request of the user, or when the user assigns a particular work on the GUI of Logon, these work processes are carried out. So dialog work process, background work process, update work process, these are the work processes which are carried out in the work process of the SAP Logon. So then after this work processes, step 4 is what? Once the user is assigned the dialog work process, means when the user enters the user ID password, it is considered as dialog work process. Once the user ID and password is verified by SAP Logon, so once the user will be going on to the next screen, be going on to the next screen. From login ID password screen, it will go on to the different screen. So this user going on to the next screen is called as roll in process. So as soon as the user enters user ID and password onto the logon, the ABAP dispatcher request its requirement to the work process. This work process then allows the user to enter on a new screen, and this is called as a roll-in. So the user is then taken to the different screen after entering the user ID and the password. Then This user, once it goes to the different screen, it is rolled out from the work process. Once he enters the user ID and password, he is rolled in the work process, and once he is going to the different screen, then he is rolled out of the work process. That is called as a roll out. Step number 5, that is called as a roll out. Okay, so this rolling in and roll out of the work processes is done in the memory called as shared memory. So once the user request is rolled out, this user is freed from the memory, and the memory is cleaned for the other user to enter in it. Now once the user gets or jumps to the different screen after entering user ID and password, so he finds the data in the buffer. Which is step number 5. So as we know, the database layer is the last layer of the SAP R/3 architecture, in which the data is stored in the form of tables. So as soon as the data is entered or work process is rolled out, it checks whether the data it needs is available in the buffer or not. Means it directly does not goes to the database. So there is something called as buffer, which we can say as a temporary memory or temporary database from where the user can access or the application layer can access the data. So this buffer also has some kind of data with it, and if the data is available in buffer, then it goes to the SAP GUI, or it goes to the presentation layer. And if the data is not available in the application buffer, it has to check the database, which is step number 6. And database is nothing but a database layer of the SAP R/3 architecture. And once the data is requested from the database of the SAP, the result is sent back to the SAP GUI via dispatcher. So, and at the end, which is step number 7, you can see here the user's data is removed from the share memory. As soon as the user gets the result in step number 6, entire data of the user is removed from the share memory, so that memory will be available to the other users, and this process is called as roll out, which is process number 7. Once the user enters, it is called as roll in. Then he performs all the tasks, and when the user gets the required result on the SAP GUI via dispatcher, the user is rolled out of the memory, and so that the memory will be available to the other users. So this is how the SAP Logon works. So in short, we can say that when we log on to the SAP Logon, so once we enter the user ID and password on the GUI, it goes to the dispatcher. Dispatcher holds this request in the queue and processes them in the FIFO, that is first in first out method. As the requests are sent, or as work processes are sent by the dispatcher or distributed by the dispatcher, this work processes are stored in the shared memory, and then they check whether their available data is there in the buffer or not. If the data is not present in the buffer, they go and check their required data in the database, and then the database processes its request and send the result back to the SAP GUI via dispatcher, and then this data or work process is rolled out from the shared memory, and the memory will be available to the other users. So this is how the SAP Logon process works when you enter the user ID and password. So these are all the backend functions which are carried out, and when you are as a user, you are doing coding or you are entering the code on a GUI, so they are the front end. So you are entering the login ID and password, that they are the front end processes. Now finally we are going to see how to install the SAP Logon. So SAP Logon installation is a simple process. So once you get a link to Logon, then you have to install it. So you will get a setup link for SAP GUI setup.exe, and you have to run that setup. After that, this window will appear, that is SAP front end installer will appear. You have to just click on next. Then this window, this type of window will appear after clicking on next. So here you have to keep in mind, you have to select all the check boxes. You have to select all the check boxes, and then you have to press next, and then you have to press next. So when you do all this, the SAP Logon will be installed on your system or on your desktop. So once the system, or once you have installed the SAP Logon onto your system, then the next step is to open the SAP Logon and enter a user ID and password. So once you open SAP Logon, such kind of window, this window will be appearing on your screen. So here in this window you have to enter your user ID and password. So here is a user ID field and here is a password. So you have to keep in mind that the first time when you use SAP Logon, you need to reset your password. So it will give you a pop-up to ask whether you want to reset a password. So you need to reset the password. Okay, and the other settings are already done by the administrator and they are defaulted. So once you enter user ID and password, press enter. So there are some password basics which you must keep in mind while setting the password for SAP Logon. So you can use uppercase and lowercase letters in your passwords. Okay. So R/3 architecture or SAP architecture does not identify or does not distinguish between uppercase and lowercase. Same is the case while writing the code of ABAP on the SAP Logon. It is not a case sensitive. Okay. So while setting password, you can set the password in upper or lowercase. You may use a combination of A to Z, small letters, 0 to 9 or punctuation marks. So these are the password basics. And what are restrictions with the setting password for SAP Logon? You cannot begin a password with question mark, exclamatory or a blank space. Okay, you cannot begin your password with question mark, exclamatory or a blank space. Then 3 identical characters you have to not use, one after another. 3 identical character cannot be used. Then any sequence of 3 characters that are contained in your username. Okay, so that also you must keep in mind. And do not use pass as your password, and do not use any of your last 5 passwords. So these are the different things which you must keep in mind while setting a password for SAP Logon. Once you enter the ID password for SAP Logon, this is the main menu screen, which is a standard SAP screen which will be appearing on your desktop or on your laptop. So this is a main menu screen of SAP where you have to do all the functions related to SAP. Now, what are the basic functions or basic things on the screens? That is, what are the different navigations you have to do on this SAP Easy Access screen, that we will see in the next video link. Thank you.